Rat King, Skyburner's Oath, Thunderlord, all exotics that either they themselves had very subtle changes applied to them, or the world around them and the sandbox around them changed, and suddenly they're a serious contender in the meta. But despite that, there are still a lot of exotics that feel like they just kind of missed the 3.0 rework boat and feel kind of bad and kind of disappointing. Today we're going to talk about exotics that may not necessarily be the worst, but feel like they got left behind when the changes came through for all of the subclass 3.0 reworks. These are exotics that by themselves might be okay, but feel like they're missing something to really push them to the spot of really feeling exotic. We're going to avoid some of the more basic things that we've talked about in the past, such as something like the Jade Rabbit, as some of these tend to be a bit more of a PvP pick. I'm going to be focusing a bit on the PvP, but mostly on the PvE side of things. So we're going to start ourselves off with the perfect example of what I'm talking about here, the Monte Carlo. Now, I know what you're thinking. Monte Carlo is pretty good for melee-based builds. Absolutely. Right there with you. But it can't help but feel like with the Pugilist perk, as well as obviously things like, Grave Robber and Swashbuckler existing, the Monte Carlo feels like it's just kind of lost its place just a little bit. It feels like it's not quite as worth it to run this thing when you can get the legendary version that doesn't take up your exotic slot that does a pretty similar thing. The changes that they've proposed to this have been more or less confirmed, which is that the Monte Carlo will probably allow you to stab the thing like it's a glaive. I really hope that that's the case. Maybe it could even bonus damage the punches that you're doing, which is such a cool idea. But there's a lot more on this list to go over. Jumping into the energy weapons here, why don't we talk about Sunshot? Now, again, by itself, a pretty solid weapon, right? Like, this is not a bad weapon by any stretch of the imagination. But doesn't it feel like just a little bit shy of being awesome that it doesn't have something like ignition when it gets kills? Imagine a world where the synergy is just baked into this weapon, allowing the kills that it actually explodes into to actually be an ignition. Then you can play into it with the rest of your subclass and really feel at home with this weapon. Again, this is not a bad weapon by any stretch of the imagination. PvP and PvE, great weapon, but ignitions, think about that. That's delicious. How about a power weapon that feels like it just got left behind? Worldline Zero has been kind of power crept out of the game. Now, again, a cool as hell exotic, but it's just like Eager Edge, but with more steps in a lot of different ways. It does have an AoE. The damage is a little bit different, but it definitely feels like it's not as special as it used to be. This one's definitely just a little bit harder to buff without taking away some of the other stuff in the game, but what if it actually jolted targets? What if you were able to, when you did the heavy sprint, it would jolt nearby targets, baking in more synergy to your Arc 3.0 reworked classes? Let me know in the comments down below though if you've got a different one for this. This one is definitely the hardest one to rework out of all of them. Coming back into the kinetic weapons, Suros Regime. I love the Suros Regime for PvP, but feels like it's just missed the train just a little bit. What if instead of what it currently has right now, which we keep, what if we allowed it to switch its weapon fire just like how something like the Hard Light can change its damage type? So instead of actually having to go into a menu and switch between the two, you can just flick a switch and suddenly you've got spin up or you have the focused fire mode. This would make this weapon a lot more adaptable, but it would leave it still a little bit behind in the PvE sphere. So what if in the spinning up mode, it would overload champions in the bottom half of the magazine, and in the high impact mode, in the focused fire mode, it would penetrate barrier shields or stop unstoppable champions. That might be just a little bit strong, allowing one weapon to do two different champion stuns, but you know what? I hate champions just as much as the next guy. Let's just give us a better tool for it, why not? Speaking of the Hard Light, let's talk about the Hard Light. Double special in PvE is a very real tactic, something that is gaining more traction as time is going on, and having a weapon that is just the primary ammo version of something like the Borealis, or in more recent terms, the Dead Messenger, really feels like it's lacking. What if we gave this a rework that would give it a sort of kill counter, something like the Vex Mythoclast, where after you get a certain amount of kills, you could actually switch it over and actually do something with it? What if when you got, let's say, 5 to 6 kills, whatever mode you're in, the next shot that you fire would cause whatever element corresponds to your current weapon's effect? So for example, Void would cause Volatile, Solar would cause Scorch, and Arc would cause Jolt. This would allow the thing to be a little bit more baked into what type of subclass you're currently playing and giving you more tools to work with in general. My goodness, is the Prospector very disappointing. A weapon that on paper is pretty cool, but one of its exotic traits being that it is a rapid fire grenade launcher feels like it's just a bit of a miss. I think this thing would really benefit from having Unstoppable just baked into the thing by default, as it does feel pretty similar to actually how you would do an Unstoppable, where you would stack up a bunch of damage and then detonate it all at once. But I also think this would be nice to allow this thing to actually increase the amount of damage that it gives to a target when it detonates them all at once, actually exponentially ramping this thing up. For goodness sake, we have the Parasite. We have so much more powerful grenade launchers that even in PvP, something like the Colony, this thing just feels so shy of actually ever finding any type of niche within the game. Coming back into kinetic, Vigilant Swing. This one is another difficult one. It definitely does a lot. It feels like it's just shy of being absolutely fantastic. One of the ideas I had for this is that as you get kills, you would actually get class ability energy back, something that we saw with the Guardians game's baked-in trait. The reason why I say class ability specifically is that it would sort of become the Monte Carlo of class abilities, of which we don't really have a good way of accessing outside of kind of doing it by collateral. Something like the Traveler's Chosen works as a good example of that. But also because being that the Vigilant Swing kind of works around you being the last man standing and trying to keep your team alive, it would give it a little bit more tools for doing so, as class abilities are typically things like rifts and barricades, which can benefit your team a lot more. Back into the energy, Polaris Lance. This one should be really obvious. Polaris Lance does not technically scorch a target on its perfect 5th perk. Instead, it just burns a target generically. It's a very subtle change, but allowing this weapon to actually scorch a target would give us a lot more tools to play in and build into this weapon. Oh boy, Darcy. Darcy exists. It is certainly a weapon that exists. When something like Cloud Strike, which is basically the same exact weapon except it's way cooler in every single way, and it's a special weapon, Darcy really feels like it's fallen behind the wayside. I know that the obvious solution here is to make it a special weapon, but even then, I still feel like it would fall short of what actually this thing needs. So what if for this weapon, instead of it doing what it currently does, as well as moving it into special weapon, what if we allowed this thing to straight up 100% ignore shields? Obviously, this would have to be special for, immunity type shields, because that would be a big concern. But this would allow you, whenever you get its exotic trait to proc, to not have to worry at all about what type of shield it's actually dealing with, and allow you to kill the target a lot easier. This would make this weapon into a much better multi-tool, but I still feel like it rides on the toes a little bit of the Borealis minus the bonus damage. So let me know what you can come up with in the comment section down below, specifically for the Darcy's rework. And we're going to round it off here with another heavy weapon. The Truth. Truth is an exotic rocket launcher that feels like it should be a legendary, except for the fact that it has multiple rockets. The truth-seeking rockets are nice, they're fun, but they just aren't worth it in the grand scheme of things. The real reason this weapon ever really sees play is when other people are using the Gjallarhorn, which is cool, but it feels a little bit like cheating, relying on other exotic weapons to make this exotic weapon work. I think the obvious solution to this is to have it whenever it damages a target to cause the target to be volatile. I think that'd be a very easy fix, as well as baking it into the Void 3.0 synergy. Maybe we could play some type of champion on this, making this unstoppable or overload, but I really think the volatile is probably the best way to go. Or here's a thought, what if we gave it a weird version of Full Court, where the longer this thing has to travel to hit the target, the more damage it would actually end up doing. This would make certain encounters a bit more favorable for the Truth, where right now Truth just seems to be sitting right alongside almost every other legendary rocket launcher. This would give it a clear-cut advantage as to when you actually want to be using the Truth, and it does kind of play into the wordplay of like seeking truth, like the longer it takes to find it, the more impactful it is. I don't know. I think it'd be a fun idea. Let me know what your thoughts are on the most disappointing or the worst exotics in Destiny 2. If you enjoyed this type of content, it would be extremely appreciated if you subscribed and left this video a like. Hope you enjoyed. Bless your faces, and deuces.